my favourite Year 10 class, and welcome to Jogbit. I hope you've managed to make the most of your holidays and the beautiful weather that we're having at the moment. I thought I would use this video just to talk you through the really difficult question that you had to go at last lesson. You guys all absolutely nailed the traffic congestion line marker, so I had to make this question a bit more challenging. So, I'm going to give you a bit of feedback on your responses and just talk you through how to answer questions like this in the exam. These are the most difficult type of questions that you're going to get in the exam. There's a lot of information that you've got to read through. And not only have you got to read through the figure, you've got to use your own knowledge as well. So the first thing that we need to do, if we come across a question that is using the figure and your own knowledge, is take a look at that figure. Now, if we look at this figure, there's absolutely loads going on. So we don't have to use all the information in the figure. You could write a brilliant essay, I know, about everything in that figure, but unfortunately in the exam, you've got a very limited amount of time to get those 9 out of 9 marks. So we've got to be very efficient in the way that we use the figure. So I'm looking at the figure now, I'm thinking, how can I draw out the information that I need super quickly? And if we look at the bottom, we've got a set of bullet points at the bottom. So I'm just going to ignore everything else that's in the figure. And I'm looking at those bullet points and thinking, right, what do I know that could link to those bullet points? Okay. So, when you're thinking of what knowledge you have, pick out a specific bit of the figure. Have a scan through the whole figure just to get the context. So I know that the greenhouse is an urban regeneration scheme. It's something that's been built in a derelict area and it's trying to be sustainable. Alright, let's look at those bullet points now. I've just made them bigger on the right there. There's renewable energy generation. They got cycle links, recycling facilities, local shops, medical centre and nursery, parks with children's playgrounds, sports centre, swimming pool and allotments with fruit so they can grow fruit and veg. I've greyed out the ones that we haven't really studied. So we're now just focusing on a few key ones. Renewable energy generation, cycle links, recycling and the sports centre. Right. We know that we've got to write 2 contrasting paragraphs. So one paragraph is going to argue that the greenhouse development is sustainable. The other paragraph is going to argue that, to a minor extent, it's not sustainable. So now I'm looking at those bullet points that I haven't greyed out, and I'm thinking, what do I know that I've studied in geography that can link to those bullet points? Let's start off with renewable energy generation. Ooh, we'll get the IT eventually. Right. We looked at renewable energy generation when we looked at London. Remember when we talked about London Power and we said that London Power is a new energy company, it's producing renewable energy and that's going to mean that less CO2 is produced. Well, I don't need to talk about London Power because I want to use the figure. So I'm going to talk about the greenhouse development. But what do I know about renewable energy that could help me talk about how sustainable the greenhouse development is? Well, we know that renewable energy doesn't produce greenhouse gases, which means that it doesn't contribute to climate change, which means that there is a lower risk of heat waves and flooding. So that is a paragraph there about renewable energy generation. You can say that the greenhouse development is sustainable because they're using renewable energy. Therefore, they're not producing greenhouse gases, they're not contributing to climate change, so they're not getting the extreme weather like heat waves and flooding. Or they're reducing, we would still get the extreme weather, but they're reducing the risk of that extreme weather. So climate change is a problem because we'll get more extreme weather. And we'll get more severe extreme weather. So, if more developments, like the greenhouse development, start using renewable energy generation, then you're reducing that risk that we'll get more extreme weather. Right. So the second bullet point is cycling links. That just means that the greenhouse development is connected to the centre of town with a cycleway. It's also connected to the railway station. So what do we know about cycling that we can write about? Well, we've studied cycling in London when we looked at the Boris bikes. We said that the Boris bikes had docking stations so that you can put a bike in, hire a bike, take it out, cycle, put it back in the next docking station. Well, does the greenhouse development have docking stations? No, it doesn't, but they're still using bikes. So I'm not going to talk about docking stations or the fact that you have 30 minutes to free hire, because that's to do with the Boris bikes. But I can talk about the fact that cycling in general reduces cardiovascular diseases. It reduces heart disease and type 2 diabetes. Therefore, if you encourage people to cycle, people who cycle have a higher life expectancy, they live longer, which means that there's less strain on healthcare services. So that's another paragraph that we could potentially write there. We could say that the greenhouse development promotes cycling, reduction in diseases, increased life expectancy, which means there's less strain on healthcare services. Right, what else do I know about cycling? Well, in London, most cyclists who are using the Boris bikes already use public transport. Well, that's very specific to the Boris bike, so I wouldn't want to talk about that because I'm trying to talk about the greenhouse development. Again, the fact that the Boris bikes only available in a city centre and are transported using diesel vans isn't relevant to the greenhouse development, but I have got a good paragraph there about how cycling improves health. Well, another thing that they're doing in the greenhouse development in those bullet points was that they've got recycling facilities. And again, we looked at recycling in London. Well, in London, the local boroughs collect the recycling. Well, that's good, isn't it? Because the greenhouse development also has recycling facilities, so they're recycling. So that means I could talk about the greenhouse development and say that the recycled materials are then used to make new products like fleeces, which means there's less waste to landfill, and that's sustainable because it's reducing the environmental damage of landfill. What if I wanted to talk about the problems of recycling and link it to the greenhouse development? Well, the fact that every borough in London has a different collection system, well, that's not relevant to the greenhouse development. But the fact that lots of products are made from different types of plastic is. So even though people in the greenhouse regeneration scheme are recycling, it's difficult for them to recycle all plastics because not all plastics are recyclable. And we know that less than 43% of UK waste is recycled, even though everyone has access to recycling facilities. So that could potentially make up a contrasting paragraph saying how the greenhouse development may not be as sustainable as it first appears, because even though there's recycling facilities, doesn't mean that all waste is going to be able to be recycled. What about this point here? 2/3 of UK's recycling is sent to LICs and NEEs like Malaysia to reduce the cost of recycling. Well, that can be applied to the greenhouse development because even though they've got the recycling facilities doesn't mean that it's going to get recycled even when people put the waste in the recycling facilities. So some of the waste that's put in the greenhouse development bins, it might end up being burnt in open air in Malaysia, which is going to cause air pollution and health problems for local people. So we've got two really good potential paragraphs that we could talk about if we wanted to there. Okay. This is an answer from Hannah and it was awesome. Let's have a look at why it's good. There are, as usual, some things that we can improve on to get us up to those 4 marks. But as structure and use of examples go, this is an excellent example. Let's just remind ourselves about the question. Right. Using figure 4 and your own knowledge, to what extent will the greenhouse development enable more sustainable living? So figure 4 is this figure here. That is the greenhouse development in Leeds. And then we've got to use our own knowledge. So when I was talking through those diagrams with you, that was giving examples of where you could use your own knowledge to answer this question. And we're thinking, to what extent will the greenhouse development enable more sustainable living? So is the greenhouse development sustainable or not? When we're thinking about whether something's sustainable, remember we're thinking, does it have a positive or neutral impact on the environment, so on nature, climate change, on people? So socially, is there a good community spirit? Can everyone get involved? Do they have access to good health? Do they have access to good education? And the economy. Have they created jobs? Are the houses affordable? Does it have a positive economic impact? And most things you'll find don't meet all the criteria of sustainable living. They might have a positive environmental impact, but they could have a negative economic impact. And we saw that when we were looking at the Olympic Park regeneration project. Yes, they built this beautiful new park, but actually that had increased the house prices because the area became more attractive and forced people with low incomes out the area. So like most things, when we're talking about sustainability in geography, there are positives and negatives, and often things don't meet all the three aspects of sustainability: the social, the economic, and the environmental aspects. Right. So Hannah started off her answer with an introduction. Very short and concise. I agree to a strong extent that the greenhouse development will enable more sustainable living. Great. She's answering the question there. Then, in her first paragraph, she uses the figure. And she's pulled out from the figure that the greenhouse development provides car sharing. You could have talked about any of the bullet points or any of the information from the figure. But Hannah's chosen to do car sharing. And then what she's done is explained why car sharing is sustainable. And she's linked the car sharing that she she's linked the car sharing from the figure to her knowledge about traffic congestion that we've learnt about. Let's go through that bit. This is sustainable as it will reduce the number of cars on the road. Great. And then she explains that point again. As a result, I really like that phrase, as a result. It just clearly shows that you're explaining yourself. Traffic congestion will be reduced, meaning less air pollution. This causes a reduced risk of respiratory illnesses. How sophisticated is that? Respiratory illnesses, brilliant. Like asthma. Reducing pressure on healthcare services like the NHS. So, she's used knowledge from the figure, the fact that there's car sharing in the greenhouse development. She's used her own knowledge about air pollution and air pollution causing respiratory illnesses. Great. She's also not only used knowledge from the figure at the start of her answer, she's used it throughout. So, she's mentioned a specific illness, asthma, which is great to see. One point that she could have improved on is when she said there's less air pollution, she could have named something that causes air pollution. So congestion will reduce, meaning there's less air pollution from diesel particulates. And that would have brought her answer up, right up to that very top of level 3, those 9 out of 9 marks that we're aiming for. Let's have a look at her second paragraph. So her first paragraph has talked about the greenhouse development, and she's used figure 4. But we can see in the question, not only do we need to use figure 4, but we also need to use our own knowledge. So Hannah's done that in her second paragraph. She started talking about London, her own knowledge. And she started off with an application sentence that answers the question. However, London has shown some methods to provide sustainable living aren't effective. Great, so we're seeing immediately that we got our own knowledge and we got a contrasting paragraph. She's chosen urban greening as a method that seems sustainable but isn't sustainable, and then she goes on to explain why it's not sustainable. As more green space is produced, the area becomes more attractive to house buyers, leading to an increase in house prices. 47% of London is green space, meaning their house prices are particularly high, resulting in people being forced to move to cheaper housing. Therefore, urban sprawl occurs around London into surrounding towns like Reading. So what we can see there is she's using phrases like therefore and meaning to expand on her explanation. She's also got specific knowledge, so we can see she's used Reading. I've highlighted it in red where she's used specific knowledge. Reading, we got place names, and we got facts. 47% of London is green space. Great. There is, however, some flaws in this argument. So, what Hannah said is that in London, when green space is produced, the area becomes more attractive to house buyers. Great. Leading to an increase in house prices. I love that bit. If you create a new green space, the area becomes more attractive, more people want to live there, so the house prices increase. And we know that when we looked at the Olympic Park, they'd taken a derelict area, they made it super attractive, but the house prices were too high for local people to afford. And that's not sustainable because that's a negative economic impact. However, the house prices in London are higher than average. Yes, that's great. They are not higher than average because there is a lot of green space in London. They're two separate things. So the house prices in London are high because lots of people want to live in London. And that means that drives the price of house up. Green space increases house prices when new green space is produced. The original green space is not the cause of house prices. Right, let's just summarize that. New green space increases house prices. But that doesn't mean that all green space means that house prices go high. I like the end bit there. If a new green space is produced, house prices will increase, and therefore people will be pushed to the outskirts of a city where the house prices tend to be cheaper. And as Hannah has correctly identified, that does cause urban sprawl. And in London, our example of urban sprawl is the surrounding towns like Reading. Awesome. So, just to summarise, I really like the way that Hannah has structured her answer. We can see it clearly answers the question. She's used both figure 4 and her own knowledge. I really like the way that she's used specific knowledge, not just once in a paragraph, but throughout her explanation. I really like the way that she's chosen one specific point and explained it using connectives in each paragraph. And she's got both an introduction and a conclusion. To improve, Hannah needs to make the distinction between new green space creating high house prices more clear. Right, these types of questions are tricky, so I'm going to talk you through another one that you're going to have a go at this week. Right, this is on your worksheet. It's the same question with a new case study. So the question is here. Using figure 4 and your own knowledge, to what extent will the Northwest Vista development enable more sustainable living? Right. So our first task is to skim through the figure because we've got to use figure 4 as well as our own knowledge. Right, so what is it? Well, it's an eco-town development. Okay, so they're building a new town. They're trying to make it eco-friendly and sustainable. They're doing something to make it a strong, nice community to live in. Right, let's focus in on these bullet points, see if we can get anything out of that. All the electricity will be provided by solar panels. Well, we definitely know stuff about renewable energy that we can talk about. All heat and hot water coming from a gas-fired combined heat and power plant. Well, we haven't really learned about that, but you don't have to talk about everything, so we'll just ignore that bullet point. Green space of 40% allowing residents and wildlife to thrive. Definitely know stuff we can talk about there. Traffic reduction through real-time bus timetable information, cycle networks and a car club. We definitely know stuff about traffic congestion reduction strategies that we can talk about. One new job per home created, job easily reached through cycling, walking or public transport. Potentially could talk about that, but I think we'd be better focusing on the things that we know lots about. Right, so in our first paragraph we need to choose one fact from the figure and explain why it's sustainable. In our second paragraph, that's where we really want to show off our own knowledge. So we want to include some information about London in our second paragraph. In our second paragraph, we need to argue why it's not sustainable to provide that two contrasting paragraphs. So, one of the things that isn't mentioned in the figure is that there is any affordable housing. So don't be afraid of, yes, make sure you talk about something that's in a figure, but also, if something's not talked about in the figure, you can also bring that in. So we're saying that they've got a 1,000-acre development with zero carbon homes, but it doesn't say that those homes are not that are affordable. So those homes that they're building in Oxford are not affordable. And we've looked at the London Olympic Park case study. We know that having no affordable housing is a problem that has negative economic impacts that make the development less sustainable. So that can make up our second paragraph. Let's see what that might look like. North West Bicester will enable more sustainable living because all electricity from the tower is being provided by solar panels. So I've picked up my one fact from the figure there. The electricity is being provided by solar panels. Right, and I've highlighted that in red because that is some knowledge, that is information that I've taken from the figure. Then I go on to explain why solar panels are sustainable. Solar panels are a renewable energy source. Therefore, in contrast to burning fossil fuels such as gas and coal, they can be used to produce energy without releasing greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, which absorb long-wave radiation released by the Earth. And you can see that I've also highlighted more words in red. These are words where I'm just showing off my knowledge. I've named some examples of fossil fuels. I've named an example of greenhouse gas, and I've been specific about the type of radiation that greenhouse gases absorb. And when I say that we're now looking, we've got the structure, we've got the explanation. We're now looking to upgrade that explanation. And the way that we need to do that is by being more specific throughout the explanation. So by adding details like names and being really specific, that's how we get those 9 out of 9 that we want to get. Right, and then I've explained it again. Consequently, they do not contribute to climate change, which is putting the UK at increased risk of extreme weather, such as flooding and heat waves. Again, I'm being really specific. I've named the types of extreme weather that climate change can cause. So there is my first paragraph. Okay, I've got an introductory sentence, I've used information from the figure, and I've explained it using my own knowledge, being specific throughout my answer. Right, when you write your answer, you are going to talk about why it's not sustainable because the housing is not affordable. In my model, I'm taking another point. I've said that it's not sustainable because of the problems that creating new green space causes. So, I've started off with my argument. To a minor extent, North West Bicester will not enable more sustainable living. And I've chosen a fact from the figure and my own knowledge about London to explain that point. The development will have 40% green space. However, the creation of new green spaces in London has caused challenges. Right, so now I'm using my own knowledge about London. London is 47% green space, and when new areas of green space are created in London, such as the Olympic Park, it makes the area more attractive. So there you can see I've used a fact, and I've also named a place, the Olympic Park. I'm linking my own knowledge about the Olympic Park to what the figure's saying about North West Bicester. Therefore, the house prices increase. This is particularly a problem in London because house prices are already higher than the UK average. Again, I'm explaining my point using therefore, and I'm being very specific. Consequently, people with lower incomes are forced out of the area into areas with lower house prices. So there we go. I've got two contrasting paragraphs. I've used facts from the figure and I've used my own knowledge about London and linked it in. The key part is going through the figure and working out what you know from other places that you could apply to this new place. And the best way to do this, and I would love to have demonstrated this for you, but I haven't worked out a way to film myself yet. The best way to do this is by annotating the figure. We know that our case study of a city is London. Write down London, list the things you know about London, then see where can you tie those in to the things that the figure talks about. Please continue to email me your answers. It's really good for me to give you feedback and for me to then give feedback to everyone based on what's been sent in to me. You can now message me via ePraise and you can attach files to that if you don't want to email it. If you have done it on a Word document, just attach the Word document or copy it into an email or a message on ePraise. If you've written it out in your book, send me a photograph. You should be able to attach that to ePraise as well, or just drop me an email. My email address is on there. Again, these questions are the trickiest questions you're going to get in the exam. We're now really working on getting those level 3, those top marks, and so it is going to be challenging. But you are absolutely nailing the non-figure, the other 9 markers. So this is the next step for us. So give this one a go. Email it into me, and we'll see if we can improve on last time. Thank you very much.